Well, hey, hi, hello, welcome back, Alexandrine Codex. This is a little odd, but it was on my mind, and I figured, well, if I'm gonna talk through it and work through it, I might as well record it, because, why the fuck not? So what I'm gonna be doing today, I know this will be thrilling, is I'm gonna go through The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I've read this book dozens of times. It's short. It's pretty easily digestible. It's a literary classic, and uh, highly recommended by people in a lot of competitive fields, not just not just military or law enforcement, but also business and politics, etc., etc. It really has a lot of depth to it. What's great about The Art of War, and we'll see this as we go through here, is Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu breaks down pretty modularly different points of analysis to take into consideration when talking about confrontation or warfare. And this kind of modular structure makes it really easy to just go through these things one after another when making considerations about tactics and strategy. So I'm not going to read the whole thing verbatim. Sure, why not? I can read the whole thing verbatim. This is this is a short version. The art of war is of vital importance to the state, the matter of life and death, a road to either safety or ruin. Hence, it's a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. The art of war, then, is governed by 5 consonant factors to be taken into account in one's deliberations when seeking to determine conditions obtaining in the field. These are moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline. Moral law causes a people to be in complete accord with their ruler, so that they'll follow them regardless of their lives, undismayed by any danger. Heaven signifies night and day, cold, heat, times, seasons. Earth comprises distances, great and small, danger and security, open ground, narrowed passes, chances of life and death. The commander stands for the virtues of wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, strictness. By method and discipline are to be understood the marshalling of the army and its proper subdivisions, graduations of rank amongst the officers, the maintenance of roads by which supplies can reach the army, and the control of military expenditure. These 5 heads should be familiar to every general. Whoever knows them will be victorious, and whoever doesn't will fail. Therefore, in your deliberations, when seeking to determine military conditions, let them be made on the basis of a comparison. In this way: 1. Which of the 2 commanders is imbued with moral law? Which of the 2 generals has the most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth? On which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Which army is stronger? On which side are officers and men more highly trained? Which army is there greater constancy both in reward and punishment? By means of these 7 considerations, I can forecast victory or defeat. A general that hearkens to my counsel and acts upon it will conquer. Let such a one be retained in command. The general that hearkens not to my counsel, nor acts upon it, will suffer defeat. Dismiss such a command. While heeding the profit of my counsel, avail yourself of any helpful circumstances over and beyond ordinary rules. According the circumstances are favorable, one should modify one's plans. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when you are able to attack, seem unable. When using forces, seem inactive. When we're near, make the enemy believe we're far away. When far away, make them believe we're near. Hold out baits to entice them, feign disorder, and then crush them. If they are secure at all points, be prepared for them. If they are superior in strength, evade them. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate them. Pretend to be weak, that they may grow arrogant. If they're taking ease, give them no rest. If their forces are united, separate them. Attack them where they are unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. These military devices, leading to victory, must not be divulged beforehand. Now the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in the temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations lead to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? So by attention to this point, I can foresee who's likely to win or lose. Now, this came to mind, and this is only section 1. There's quite a few sections, and maybe we'll get to them, maybe we won't. But this was popping into my mind today with, with all the protests going on, and just some first-hand observational takeaways from what I've seen in my city in the last few days. And I'd like to break down what I've seen and using this as a lens to talk about it. So first I want to talk about these 5 constant factors: moral law, heaven, earth, commander, method, and discipline. So moral law is people being in complete accord with their ruler or their commander so that they will follow orders regardless of their lives, undismayed by danger. So obviously this is an ambiguous thing to talk about. In the context of this work, the ruler is sort of unambiguously a king or an emperor or a duke. However, in the context I'm talking about, a ruler is more an idea. Protesters are not ruled by a commander or an officer or anything like that. They're ruled more by an idea and an emotional undercurrent. So that's tricky to compare that to, say, a police force. Now, a police force have gone through a lot of training, a lot of cultural working, years of being in a society that educates them and molds them into being in accord with their ruler. A lot of police forces, I don't know if this is still the case, have IQ limits. At least that used to be a thing. You know what? Snopes me, baby. I want to make sure I'm not Snopes. Police IQ. So this is a story from 2000, but court's okay barring high IQs for cops. So it's been 20 years. I don't know if this is still a thing or not, but it's been passed around for quite some time. Not to punch down, but just saying it's an intentional part of the hiring and recruitment process for police officers that they are not the sort of person to question authority. That they are the sort of person who fits in very well with adhering to moral law. That they are in complete accord with their ruler, the law. Well, you know, in theory, the ruler of authority, right? That they will adhere to authority, whether that be collective authority between police officers if they're corrupt, whether that be, you know, this platonic ideal of a police officer who adheres to the law, whether they adhere to yada yada yada, but they tend to be obedient. Protesters are not obedient. That's the point, right? So the comparison is not in obedience, then it's in obedience to an ideal, and both seem utterly uncompromising, right? But it's the second part of the sentence, that they will follow regardless of their lives, undismayed by danger. Only a very, very small percentage of protesters go to a protest with that mentality in mind, this kind of willingness to be hurt or die for this cause, there's a lot of emotional energy, and maybe people feel that at first, but the morale, the will, the discipline of protesters tends to break pretty quickly. Not for any fault of their own. They're up against tactics and strategies that have been refined over the course of well over 100 years now, in breaking strikes, in breaking protests, in subduing mass movements, particularly here in the US. Also, people in the US, police forces in the US, learn from Israeli teachers oftentimes from their experiences in Palestine. So that's fun. So I think when we're comparing which of the two sovereigns is imbued with moral law, when it comes to being in accord and this willingness to follow regardless of their lives, I think the advantage of the moral law definitely falls to law enforcement, right? In order to meet that, protesters would need to organize. They would need to have clearly stated and clearly agreed upon common goals, common desires, common cause, and a shared notion that this common cause is worth being hurt, is worth being thrown in jail, is worth dying for. And there definitely is a core of any protest, a solid core of any protest that hold that to be true. But I mean, a protest by its very nature is unorganized, riotous. It's a bit of a mob. So that kind of discipline is broken pretty easily. And then, which of the two generals has the most ability? Well, on one hand, you have a police department or a law enforcement agency, right? If that be a police department or a federal agency, whatever, or a combination of the two. And on the other hand, you either have no leadership or you have numerous leaderships. As in, a lot of protests are organized by one organization or one individual, but oftentimes a lot of the people at that protest come from different organizations that are allied or in alignment or standing in solidarity with the organizer. And when push comes to shove, protesters will stay with their faction, stay with their clan, right? More so than they will adhere to the central authority. Which is difficult, right? And not very effective. And relate that to someone whose profession it is to have studied or at least understand the use of law enforcement forces in suppressive actions and in counter protest actions. Then again, the second point, which of the two generals has the most ability, falls, I think, to law enforcement pretty handily. It's hard to even contest that. Now, Earth talks about distances, great and small, danger and security, open ground, narrow passes, chances of life and death. So specifically, what we're talking about with a lot of these protests are urban environments. Now, they can be densely populated and relatively narrow urban environments, like here in Seattle or in Chicago, or really in a lot of these cities, or they can be a bit more broad, like in LA. and it really depends on where in LA I'm talking about, but for the most part, cities are narrow. Street fighting is narrow. That terrain tends to favor. I mean, you only need like the vaguest historical education to know this sort of thing. It's just like a mountain pass, just like say Thermopylae, for example. That's something probably everyone knows that was very popular in the mid 2000s. You only need a very small elite force to hold a relatively large amount of ground or a significant section of territory. So that again is highly advantageous for the police, because the police have a smaller but more elite fighting force. So if there is a confrontation, the police are invested in just blocking off a street and boxing you in, and then walking that box in. So if you were to protest, and things were to get violent, or things were to seem to get violent, or you were just being intelligent about how you were holding your protest, you would have it go through streets with as many intersections as possible, not get boxed in anywhere, and you would have to be very, very particular with what kind of terrain you're playing with and what kind of ground you're trying to hold. Obviously, the high ground. If you can have your march be along top a hill, and all the intersecting streets are down that hill, that's a really great spot. Even if it might not be the most culturally impactful area, it is a strategically viable area. And, you know, you'd have to make a lot of case-by-case, street-by-street, really, block-by-block decisions as to where, you know, Route A should be, where Route B should be, C should be, D should be. And these are things that organizers do, but I feel like a lot of organizers don't do it with the anticipation of conflict in mind, with the lens that how do I put our people in the best defensive or tactical position possible. So that's really, it's open. It can go either way. Honestly, it can really go either way, but cities tend to be pretty claustrophobic, pretty small streets. They don't favor the mob. They really don't. Not unless you get a really fucking big mob, and then the mob is only successful if it's coming from multiple directions. So again, Earth seems to favor police forces. It's almost as if they've been designed to exceed and excel at controlling large groups of people in this environment. Heaven signifies night, day, cold and heat, time and seasons. Now, naturally, these conditions are going to be more or less the same for either side. The prevailing difference here is how the two sides respond to these conditions. Say it's raining. The police have weatherproof gear. Protesters probably don't. They may if they're very well prepared, but your average protester probably doesn't. Say it's cold. Police, again, have weatherproof gear that's been designed to operate in all kinds of seasons, and they have different gear that they can switch out depending on the season, depending on the condition. And, you know, they've had millions or billions of dollars put into their logistics and their infrastructure and their support structure. So heaven again goes to the police here. And which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Well, we already talked about that. Which army is stronger? Now, strength is really ambiguous here, though I would say this point, number 5, would actually go to the protest. Because in circumstances where protesters and police actually clash, and if everything else were equal, the protesters could win, and often do push the police back. It's only through use of tactics and strategy that police are able to overcome such significantly larger groups. Through discipline, through tactics, through organization. On which side are the officers and men more highly trained? Again, very little contest here. This has to go to the police. In which army is there a greater constancy in reward and punishment? Again, the police. There is no reward or punishment structure for protesters. I mean, the reward is maybe something gets done, maybe we make something felt, maybe we take a position, maybe we burn down a precinct that has been targeting our community and sheltering people who have been victimizing our community. That's a very strongly motivating reward, right? But the police are motivated by it being their livelihood. And their failure to act, punishment, would be putting that livelihood at risk. So again, using these 7 factors, we can say that, well, if nothing else changes, the police are going to win any of these conflicts, 6 out of 7 times, easy. And probably more than that. Well, okay, how do we respond to that then? How would a protest being organized with the consideration that things might get violent, probably spurred on by the police, probably caused by the police if the events of this last week are of any evidence, or historical context for the police being the provocateurs, so it's probably the case. Well, you can't... Moral law, you can do a little bit of that. This, you have to do months and weeks and days before the protest. You need to have organizations. You need to have unions. You need to have parties. You need to have factions. You need to have organizations that educate people, that reach out to people and find common ground, find common goals, and build your movement around these common things. And that common thing could just be a common enemy. You can build a movement behind sharing a common enemy, even if your common goal is not the same, individual goals are not the same. That common shared value is a moral law that you can organize around effectively as being your core tenet. You need that core tenet. You need it to be known and shared ubiquitously. And this last part, you can't actually manufacture. This has to be manufactured for you by the state, by the conditions, by the economic and social conditions in which you exist. Your members, your protesters, need to feel threatened by whatever it is that they're protesting, whatever it is that they're confronting, whatever common enemy or common thing it is that they are fighting against. They need to feel that confronting or overcoming this challenge, this danger, this enemy, is necessary to guarantee their survival or to ensure their continued survival in some way. And so there are some causes that will do that, like Black Lives Matter, for example. There are some causes that will sort of do that, like Occupy Wall Street. And there are causes that won't do that, like the protests where people have been demanding ability to get a haircut. Something like that. Push come to shove, I'm willing to bet a lot of those folks who are saying they're willing to die for, I mean, maybe they are willing to die for their civil liberties, but I really doubt it. But again, maybe they are. If they are, then this qualifies. This absolutely qualifies. But you need that shared conviction. and this is something that you can't just manifest on the spot. You can reinforce it on the spot. You can absolutely reinforce it through psychological things like call outs and callbacks, like mantras, like musical instruments. Holy shit, those make a huge difference. If you look at the reaction of protesters when there's even like one dude playing a trumpet or one dude playing a horn or like one gal on a drum drumming out a beat, there was a reason that instruments were used in armies for centuries. They're incredibly good at giving people something to focus on, this central thing to focus on and kind of crystallize around. So this moral law advantage that the police seem to be enjoying more often than not can be challenged. It can be challenged. It just takes work, and it takes time, and it takes conviction, it takes organization. And I'll say this, we're fucking getting there. We are absolutely getting there. Times are incredibly desperate right now, so that desperation is leaning very much into regardless of their lives, undismayed by danger. People already feel like their lives are on the line because black people, and I mean all minorities, but primarily black people's lives are in danger from our police forces, from our criminal justice system, from our social inequalities and economic inequalities, and just entire society. They are. And then this epidemic on top of it has been making quite clear through the statistics that even without action, their communities are more heavily affected by dangerous things that are dangerous to everyone, just because of how they've been positioned within our society, economically, materially, socially. And I mean, fuck, unemployment in the United States is somewhere around 30% right now, which is insane. It's something more like 40% for low-income people. So yeah, that's a thing right now, and that's a big part of why we're getting so many protests, and why a lot of the protests, instead of breaking and dispersing, are standing their ground and getting violent in reciprocation to the violent tactics being used against them, is because they're not as afraid for their lives or their livelihoods as historically they might have been. So moral law is something we can affect. Moral law is something we can work with. Heaven? I mean, kinda. When push comes to shove, the material conditions of the materials available to protesters and the materials available to the police are always going to give the police, almost always, going to give the police a higher quality standard of equipment and training and discipline and maybe even leadership. Probably leadership. So response to heaven is kind of hard. So in order to eliminate or nullify this point, protesters have to pick and choose their battles. Absolutely do. You have to pick and choose your battles very strategically. If you remember from Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare, when he talked about fighting in urban environments, he said, do it at night. And I don't disagree. If your intention is to hit a target, say a police station, you do it at night. If your objective is to be socially disruptive, make the news, get a lot of attention towards your cause, like peaceful protests do, then the day is obviously the right time to do that. Well, do you do it in the cold? Probably not, right? Because doing it in the cold, you need to make sure everybody has coats for cold weather clothing, and a lot of lower income people do, but maybe not very much. So the summer becomes the time of year where protests and militant action are most possible summer days and summer nights. It's not new. This is not new. It used to be that summers and fall were the times of year to go to war. Because in the spring you have to plant your crop, but then you have this population of peasants that you can use during the summer to peasants or laborers or soldiers or whatever that you can use in a short war over the course of the summer because their labor's no longer occupied. And then by fall, you need to bring them back in time for harvest. So it's continuing a centuries, millennia old tradition of that timing being important. So Earth is, it's tricky to talk about here. So, like I was saying earlier, urban environments tend to favor small elite forces over even much, orders of magnitude larger forces who are less well equipped, less well trained. This comes down to you need to plan very particularly, very specifically, where to go. You want a route that provides multiple avenues to get to where you're going, because they're probably going to be blocked off. You want routes that give you as much open space to maneuver as possible. You want routes where I was watching a video on the Hong Kong protesters today. They use a tactic, I forget what the Chinese for it is, what the Cantonese is for it. It basically be like water. It's this idea that just keep moving. If they push back, just fucking move and go somewhere else. And by the time that the police are able to deploy a sizable force, you're already gone. So the terrain does not advantage you in confrontation. So maybe just don't get in a confrontation. I mean, when I went through these 7, I said, yeah, 6 out of these 7 are absolutely not on your side. What you can do, and what the Hong Kong protesters are doing, is recognizing, okay, that's the material reality we're in. We're going to find ways to hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, and not get in a drawn-out conflict, because we cannot win a drawn-out conflict. Win the war by 1,000 cuts instead. And if you'll remember, if you'll look back on the Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare reading, that exact same thing is true. And that exact same thing is talked about. One particular moment that I think started getting these wheels turning in my head for me wanting to take a look at this, and mostly for myself, just kind of talk through my thoughts here, was in Seattle. As in many US cities yesterday, there were police officer cars burned. Now, in some of these cities, it's very likely that these were police provocateurs or white nationalists. Honestly, maybe they're outside actors, but statistically speaking, outside actors only account for a very, very slim percentage of violent actions. Outside actors is always used to try to legitimize a movement in the eye of the oppressor. Like, oh no, we're the good ones, and disavow the your comrades who are actually putting themselves at risk. So I chafe a lot at that distinction. I chafe a lot about the fucking mental gymnastics that are going on right now with, oh well, a lot of the people in this city who are protesting aren't even from the state. Turns out they're all pretty much from the state, and it's just the local police force lying about it in order to act like it was outside influence, outside actors who made the violence happen, and not taking ownership for the fact that it was the police that made the violence happen. And if you're looking at it through a tactical lens, Again, like I was just saying, the protesters are better off in avoiding conflict for as long as possible. Just moving and 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 not clashing. Because if you clash, you're probably gonna lose. I mean, you're not definitely gonna lose, but you're probably gonna lose. If you're like, your best move is staying on the move, on the run, which is kind of exhausting, but allows you to continue marching longer, maybe hit more targets, maybe, I don't know, be seen more, be heard more, whatever it is, the goal that you have, and of course this varies by protest and demonstration, you have more time to accomplish that goal. So, yeah, the thing that got me started about this, to loop back to what I was talking about, is in Seattle, police cars got torched. And in the back of one of these cars, or several of these cars anyway, some protesters found AR-15s. Loaded AR-15s. Well, maybe not loaded. Maybe the ammunition was located nearby, but it seemed to be loaded when they got it out of the cars. Now, the stories made headlines because it seems like a private security officer working for a local television station disarmed the protesters, but I was thinking a lot about that. I was thinking a lot about, what if I were in that situation? What if I found myself in the position where I could take ownership of a gun in that situation? Purely hypothetical, what would the tactically sound move be? Would it be picking it up and using it, right? I mean, that's the video game logic, right? Yeah, I pick up that gun, I start taking guys down, and then I get their guns and give it to my friends, and then, you know, we maybe, but if you remember from Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare, what Che talked about was this idea that the weapons, the arms, the ammunition, the supplies that you use are going to be those of the force that you're fighting. So to me, this seemed like, oh, well, you take those guns and you leave. You leave because you've accomplished something very noteworthy today, and it's time to go. It's time to go, take these resources, and do something with them later. You know, that's a later campaign. That's a later objective. But you've happened upon a pretty big deal. Like, say, when you're playing XCOM, in a high difficulty, and you are probably gonna lose the fight, but you're able to, with a couple of soldiers, or a couple of your units, loot some really good plasma weapons, or Illyrium, or parts that you really need in order to research or build, you know, plasma tech, or better armor, or whatever else. Maybe the strategically best decision is to withdraw from that conflict, withdraw from that fight, use those new resources to come back stronger later. Right? And that's what got the wheels turning a little bit today, is yeah, there is such a big movement going on right now. There's a lot of passion, there's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of vindictive, righteous emotion out there, and it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly moving and incredibly influential, and to some degree wildly successful. In other degrees, it's unrefined, it's not using tactics, its logistics are all fucked up, the organization is bad in a lot of places, and yeah, just seeing yesterday, really, and over the last few days, the potential and the energy for some really long-lasting campaign, political campaign, ideally peaceful political campaign. and seeing it be broken up, broken down, beaten down, and pushed out, largely because of a lack of good organization. It's been really striking. Really quite striking. I'm not going to go through and read the rest of Sun Tzu's Art of War. This is all great. Sincerely, all of this is great. It's all very short, very simple, very easy to understand. And all of these considerations are things you should take into consideration if you are making a serious plan. If you are planning a protest, if you are planning, I don't know, some kind of military action or policing action. These are things that, and I'm not making this shit up. This is like an entry course book for any officer school, I think, in any military worldwide. And it has been for quite some time. This is like the So You Want to Fight a War 101 book. If you haven't read it, even if you only like strategy games, even if you only like Paradox titles, you never read it, go read it. It's free online. This one's on MIT.edu. MIT.edu. There are plenty of other versions. You can buy your own if you want. I think I have 2 different translations of it here, actually. I've owned like 4. Absolutely take a look. Absolutely take a read. If you're considering getting involved politically, if you're considering, I don't know, opening a fucking business, even, read this. Read this. Sincerely read this, because this is an incredible tool. These are incredible questions and considerations to take into account. Now, there's been a lot of work done on top of this. There's been a lot of derivative work. There's been a lot of work building on top of this, and bringing it in line with modern economics, politics, technology, military strategy, yada 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 yada. But this is a really good foundational understanding and really good start for appreciating good tactics, good strategy. Yeah, okay, I had fun. I know this probably seemed... Oh god, that probably didn't sound good through the mic. I know this seems a little out there, but genuinely, I didn't want to just sit here and think through it. I wanted to talk through it, and just keep going off, phone. Please, just keep going off. I wanted to talk through it, but if I'm talking to myself, I might as well do it on camera. That way I can record myself being a crazy person. I had been saying I wanted to release my mod by the end of May. Obviously this last week has introduced some unexpected circumstances that have attracted a lot of my time, energy, and attention. I don't know. I honestly don't know if I have the mental or emotional energy to dig in that today. I'm pretty preoccupied with what's going on in my city, what's going on in my community, and maybe I'll get around to it tomorrow, June 1st, but then there's some stuff going on then. I want to get this done. I want to get this released. I mean, it's not done. It's not going to be done for a long time, but I want to release at least what I've done so far in case I don't know, in case something happens to me, just so that you can have the shit I've been working on for a while, in case I just get bored and lose interest. So there's at least like a working alpha version of it out there. So I'll hopefully get to that in this next week. God, I don't even know. I just want to go get a fucking... I was gonna say massage, and then I'm like, I don't want a massage, I want to get, like, absolutely hammered. I'm like, I don't really want to do that, but maybe it'd be nice to, like, get really high. I'm like, I don't really want to do that. Maybe I just need to get laid, and that's where my brain is at. It's just like, I am operating under high stress right now. I'm like, how do I alleviate that? I can't, so I'm just gonna make peace with it. I will probably have more shit up in a week. Till then, I'm gonna say toodaloo, take care, I'll see you then, bye-bye.